At midnight in the month of June, I stand beneath the mystic moon. An opiate vapor, dewy dim, exhales from out her golden rim, and softly dripping drop by drop upon the quiet mountaintop, steals drowsily and musically into the universal valley. The rosemary nods upon the grave, the lily lolls upon the wave. Wrapping the fog about its breast, the ruin moulders into rest. Looking like Lethe, see the lake, a conscious slumber seems to take, and would not for the world awake. All beauty sleeps, and lo where lies Irene with her destinies. O lady bright, can it be right, this window open to the night, the wanton airs from the treetop, laughingly through the lattice drop. The bodiless airs a wizard rout, flit through thy chamber in and out, and wave the curtained canopy so fitfully, so fearfully. Above the closed and fringed lid, neath which thy slumbering soul lies hid, that o'er the floor and down the wall, like ghosts the shadows rise and fall. O lady dear, hast thou no fear? Why and what art thou dreaming here? Sure thou art come o'er far-off seas, and wonder to those garden trees. Strange is thy pallor, strange thy dress, strange above all the length of tress, and this all solemn silentness. The lady sleeps, O may her sleep, which is enduring, so be deep. Heaven have her in its sacred keep. This chamber changed for one more holy, this bed for one more melancholy. I pray to God that she may lie forever with unopened eye, while the pale sheeted ghosts go by. My love, she sleeps, oh may her sleep, as it is lasting, so be deep. Soft may the worms about her creep, far in the forest dim and old, for her may some tall vault unfold, some vault that oft hath flung its black and winged panels fluttering back, triumphant o'er the crested palls of her grand family funerals. Some sepulchre remote, alone, against whose portals she hath thrown, in childhood many an idle stone, some tomb from out whose sounding door she ne'er shall force an echo more. Thrilling to think, poor child of sin, it was the dead who groaned within.
Everyone, welcome back to our next exciting episode of the Schorr Manor podcast, season 2. This is Matt and Amanda here.
Yes, and what I just read was, of course, a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, the legendary author who gave us The Cask of Amontillado, The Telltale Heart, and, of course, The Raven. Everyone knows The Raven.
Alright, so for this week's podcast, we thought we would go back. We know for season 1 we did our very favorite Halloween movies, so what we've done for this podcast is some that are some honorable mentions.
Because there are so many great ones. You could really rate a bunch of favorites, but we did choose to make our top favorites last time.
Yeah, we had to go through and weed out a bunch, so.
Yeah, so these were some unfortunate ones that didn't make the cut last year, I guess you could say, but they're going to make the cut this year because they're fantastic films that deserve some mention.
Yes, absolutely. So for this one, we've each chosen 5, and Matt's going to start us off with his. I decided to do mine in a countdown, and Matt's just going to kind of do his however.
Because they're all so wonderful, I can't put them in any sort of order. But first, and most certainly not least, is Frankenstein, the universal black and white classic. Let me get my notes here. So Frankenstein is part of the golden age of Universal monster films. It was released in 1931, and it tells the story, as everybody knows, of a scientist digging up corpses in order to build a man animated by electricity, which of course goes just spectacularly wrong. I think we all saw that coming, right? The legendary James Whale directed this movie. He was a fresh new director from England at the time. Now, the initial plan was for the monster to be just this heartless killing machine. But Whale seriously reworked the script in order to portray the creature with a little bit of humanity, which incidentally was more in line with the original story by Mary Shelley. Now, there's a lot of iconic stuff in this movie, not least of which is Boris Karloff as the monster. To look the part, he wore a really bulky costume with 4-inch platform boots, and he underwent extensive makeup sessions beforehand. The result, though, is pretty much, still to this day, it's the image everyone has of the Frankenstein monster. Anybody, when they think of the monster today, they think of the Boris Karloff, green, flat top, bolts in his neck. That, to them, that's Frankenstein and probably always will be. There's also, a little bit lesser known, but it's definitely in people's heads, the electronic effects when they reanimated the corpse. These were created by special effects creator Kenneth, hope I say this right, Strickfaden. I think he might be German. Mm-hmm. People don't mention this one quite as much as Karloff, but really, honestly, anytime you think of a mad scientist working in a lab in any kind of horror movie setting, this is what you think of. All of those Jacob's ladders, all the electrical sparks and everything that's going on. So yeah, there's that. Now, this movie, along with Dracula starring Bela Lugosi, which came out about a year prior, I think, it was such a huge hit that this is what prompted Universal to announce plans for more horror movies like almost right after this thing hit theaters. So like The Wolfman, The Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, they can all thank Dracula and Frankenstein for their existence. This is a just fantastic movie, just the look, the feel. This is Universal. I'm not going to say at its absolute best because arguably Bride of Frankenstein is a better movie, but it's so good. And this is one, did you watch this one with me when we got the DVD? Yeah. So what did you think of it?
I mean, I agree. Like, Frankenstein is my ultimate favorite TV monster. And out of all the movies that I've seen, this one's by far my favorite because it is the original and what everything else is based on.
Yeah, it's just so good. So that's my first one. What was your first outing? Number 5.
So technically mine is number 5. And this movie actually, you guys are going to laugh, but holds a special place in my heart. It is The Faculty, which if you've seen the movie, you know it's about an alien species coming to take over like a school and a town and everything. But for me, it holds a special place in my heart because it was actually the first, like, I'm doing air quotes, horror movie that I ever watched. If you don't count Signs, which to me is a funny movie more than a horror movie. Like, I laugh all the way through it.
I don't think that's what they were going for.
There's so many, like, awkward moments and things in it. But anyways, I'm getting off track. So, The Faculty, I watched probably when I was like 14-ish. And I actually watched it at home by myself. And it was one of those true, like, you see this on TV, they're watching, the scary moment happens and the phone rings. Sure happened. My parents had gone grocery shopping and they were going to have to go somewhere else. And they wanted to call and tell me that they would be home a little bit later. And didn't want me freaking out thinking they were, like, in a car wreck. And it was, like, right when Stokely, like, hits the big cage thing.
Oh, that's great.
In the locker room. This movie was directed by none other than Robert Rodriguez, who was probably best known for his Mexican trilogy From Dusk Till Dawn, Sin City, and, of course, for us Disney lovers, The Adventures of Shark Boy and Lava Girl. It was written by screenwriter, filmmaker, and actor, another triple threat on here, Kevin Williamson, best known for the Scream series. And Matt loves the fact that it stars Frodo Baggins himself, Elijah Wood, before he became Frodo Baggins. Not to mention Robert Patrick, which is the T-1000 from Terminator 2, which is another one of Matt's favorite movies.
It's everyone's favorite, is it not?
I don't like the Terminator movies. Anyways. Bebe Neuwirth, who most people will recognize as Lilith from Frasier and Cheers. Josh Hartnett, of course, for those of us who were in love with Josh Hartnett back in the day. Piper Laurie, and probably my favorite part of the movie. Now, back when I watched it, it was because of Josh Hartnett. But Christopher McDonald, who is Shooter McGavin in Happy Gilmore.
Yes, and he's playing the same guy in this movie.
Pretty much, yes. Elijah Wood plays his son, and he's trying to explain to him that something's happening, and he just won't buy it.
It's the closest he has ever become to being a good guy in a movie because, simply by default, because he wasn't ever possessed by an alien.
Yeah. I'm practically the only adult that wasn't. But, interesting fact, it actually came out on Christmas Day in 1998 and apparently did not do well. I didn't know very much about the background of the film other than who was in it. It does kind of surprise me that it didn't do well. I thought it was a very well done film. Again, I was 14 when I saw it, though. And so it has since become a cult classic, which also makes sense for me. I'm very much a cult classic movie person.
Oh, me too. Those always end up being my favorites.
That will be the only cult I will ever join. Oh, and let's see. Okay, so we have one more interesting fact about it. The screenwriters, David Wercher and Bruce Kimmel, initially couldn't get any buyers for the script until after the success of Wes Craven's Scream. So then Miramax bought it and actually rushed it into production. So, thank you, Wes Craven, for the faculty.
I'm both surprised that it didn't do very well financially and that they had trouble finding any backers because to me it's a perfect concept because I don't know if kids still do this today, but there was always that one teacher that people said that woman has to be from another planet. She is too weird. They made a joke out of it in Men in Black with like the one teacher that Will Smith looks at. He's like, I knew she was from Jupiter and like, well, one of the moons. But it was just, to me, it's a perfect concept right there. You've got, the teachers are from another planet because they're possessed, but still. And then on top of that, you have this sort of invasion of the body snatchers thing going where you have this paranoia. It's like, it's a great little movie.
The only part that I would complain about is that I feel like it is way too predictable. Like, I knew from the get-go who the alien was because it was very obvious. It's a brand new girl in town.
Oh,
so,
see to me...
Spoiler alert, sorry.
A movie that's almost 20 years old. I think you're okay.
But some people get mad. I mean, to me, like, I knew it immediately who was going to be the alien. I mean, and so I thought, well, surely not. Surely it's going to be somebody else. Surely they've done this to, like, dupe you. But no, it was.
See, they had me fooled because, the part where they all do the Josh Hartnett's personal drug that he created that was able to kill all the... She made it look like she really took it, and of course you find out later she didn't.
Right.
But I completely fell for it. I remember when they reveal it's like, it's her? I feel kind of dumb now. All right, well, moving on. Speaking of aliens that can look human, next one on my list is The Thing. This is a John Carpenter movie based on a 1938 novella by John W. Campbell Jr. titled Who Goes There? Now, most people are probably pretty familiar with this, so I'll keep this synopsis kind of brief. It tells the story of a group of researchers in Antarctica who encounter a parasitic extraterrestrial life form that assimilates and then imitates other organisms. The men are overcome with paranoia when they realize they can't trust each other because any one of them could be the alien. Now, this movie hit theaters in 1982, so I don't feel like I should have to worry about telling you guys spoilers on this one. It was immediately described by critics as, quote, instant junk, and also, quote, a wretched mess. Many said it was the most hated film of all time, and it was an absolute box office dud. So I think The Faculty even did better than this movie. In hindsight, one reason people think it might have failed to impress was because it competed with the insanely popular E.T. by the legendary Steven Spielberg, which was a much happier take on alien visitations. At any event, it wasn't until years later that this movie found an audience, and it was, which happened so much back then, on home video and television. It's since been kind of reevaluated, and it's considered one of the best science fiction horror films ever made, and it's gained a really, once again, cult following. I am among that cult. I think this is a fantastic movie. It starred the legendary Kurt Russell, longtime Quaker Oats and Liberty Mutual promoter Wilford Brimley, and the rest of the cast is also pretty impressive. There's Keith David, who went on to voice Spawn in the HBO animated series and appeared in, you'll know this one, There's Something About Mary. He was her adopted father in that movie. Let's see, there's also Donald Moffat, who went on to be a regular in The West Wing. Richard Masur, hope I'm saying that right, from the 1990 adaptation of Stephen King's It, and, this is prominent, the 24th president of the Screen Actors Guild, so hey, good for him. There's T.K. Carter, who some might remember from Good Morning Miss Bliss, a.k.a. the first season of Saved by the Bell. There's also Charles Hallahan from Going in Style, Cast a Deadly Spell, and Dante's Peak. So really, kind of a star-studded cast. They might not have been considered star-studded at the time, but they certainly are today. Now, of course, the real star of this movie, though, is the alien. Rob Bottin, whose work includes RoboCop, Total Recall, and Mission Impossible. Nice little resume there. He handled all the creature effects. He suggested that instead of having like a primary form, the creature should constantly be changing, like it never had a main form. It was always adapting and changing. He said the creature had been all over the galaxy, which allowed it to call on different attributes as necessary, like, for instance, a stomach turning into a giant mouth or a head that can sprout spider legs. Spoiler alert, that happens in the movie. Bottin, incidentally, he seriously overworked himself on this project. He spent more than a year on the Universal lot with no days off, and he often slept on the sets or in locker rooms. He was eventually hospitalized for exhaustion, double pneumonia, and a bleeding ulcer because he just insisted on being involved in almost all of the effects work. He eventually got some help from legendary effects creator Stan Winston. I think a lot of people know Stan Winston. He did like Terminator, Terminator 2, just about any major effects film from the 80s and 90s he was involved with. So Stan Winston lent a hand, but he refused any official credit for his work, and he insisted that Bottin get full credit. Winston still got a thank you in the credits, though. So I don't think you've watched this one with me. We've talked about you watching it. This is one that you would be kind of interested in, though, because it's not a human, right? It's a monster. You can handle those a little bit better.
Can handle those better.
The interesting thing about this, and I think why I haven't pushed for this, is because this movie, there are very few horror movies that leave me uneasy when they're over. And this one did. Spoiler alert on the ending. I'm not going to say too much here, but it ends with a really big question mark. And it's a genius question mark, I think. It's over and you're just kind of left wondering, oh my gosh. And that's a good horror movie when you do that. So, yeah, anyway, that's why this gets an honorable mention for me for the visuals. The acting is great. And just the finale and the ending and everything. It's very, very good.
Speaking of question marks, my number 4 is not a movie, in fact, but an entire TV series, which is, I'm sure most of you can guess, Goosebumps. So, Goosebumps was an anthology series based, of course, on the popular books by R.L. Stine, who's been referred to as the Stephen King of children's literature, which I would agree with. He has more than 100 books in the series, so they had plenty to choose from to make the TV show. Deborah Forte was the executive producer, which she also worked on some other really well-known shows, including Clifford the Big Red Dog, The Magic School Bus, and my favorite, The Babysitter's Club. And so, if you have seen the original Goosebumps series, you will know that it is way freaking scarier than those movies with Jack Black.
Not knocking those movies, though. We've seen the first one, and it was fun.
We did. It was fun, but, to me, that's not Goosebumps. Goosebumps was not fun. It was legitimately made
I'll agree with that,
to give you nightmares. And just like the books, because I did read a handful of the books. Obviously, I read the first one, Welcome to the Dead House, because my name is Amanda, and the girl's name in the book is Amanda. But just like the books, the TV show, the very end would leave you with that question mark of, is it really over?
Yeah, I read a few of his books, and every single one ended that way.
I remember there was one where it was a family, and they were traveling on vacation, and I can't remember if the place was closed that they were going to go or what, but they stop at this theme park, and they don't know that they are legitimately trying to be killed. At the end, they, of course, have figured it out, and they get away, but the last shot is a family of monsters watching this reality on TV, and like the car is like hanging over a cliff, and that's how it ends. I absolutely loved the intro. If you've never seen it, YouTube it. I'm sure it's on YouTube. And it always had, I'm assuming, I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming it was R.L. Stein standing there. And
I don't know. That's a good question.
Like all these different scenes from a bunch of the different episodes. And at the very end, he would say, or it might have been at the beginning, but I think it was at the end, he would say, like, reader beware, you're in for a scare. Just like in the books. And then he would turn into, like, bats and fly away.
That was a great intro. It was amazing. The look is cool. A guy in a trench coat and a black hat, and you never see his face, and he's carrying that briefcase that just pops open.
He wore black sunglasses as well.
Did you see his face?
I think so.
Really? I'm pretty
sure that he said
it. My memory of it is he's just all in shadow.
Or he may have said, watch or beware, you're in for a scare. I don't know. I know, like, the books said reader.
It was effective, by the way.
It was. Yeah. I mean, I still remember it now over 20 years later.
I discovered that one later. I grew up on Tales from the Crypt. I wasn't as into it, I'll admit, as I was Tales from the Crypt, but I had an appreciation for it. I was like, oh, this is great. This is it reminded me a lot of Are You Afraid of the Dark? I loved that series.
I could not watch it. I was too young to be able to watch Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Well, I think it's on Netflix and you can watch it. No, we just have it on DVD. That's how we're able to see a few episodes.
Of Tales from the Crypt?
No, Goosebumps.
Oh.
I wish Tales from the Crypt was on Netflix. I would throw a party. Binge watch that whole thing over a weekend. Okay. Going on to something that I love this film, but I am still regretting this film. Because this is one of the few horror films I was able to get Amanda to watch with me. And she still hasn't forgiven me. So this next section is going to take a little bit of work for us to get through. This is the classic, cult classic, Killer Klowns from Outer Space. Incidentally, this was the first movie really that came out with evil, deadly clowns, long before Pennywise and Stephen King's It. These were the real killer clowns.
True to their name, they are legit killer clowns. This movie will make you afraid to see popcorn.
Okay. Killer Klowns is the one and only film written and directed by the Kyoto brothers, Charles, Edward, and Stephen. Its plot centers on a group of aliens from space that resemble circus clowns who invade a small town in order to capture, kill, and harvest people for food. The project is easily the one the Kyoto brothers are best known for, but they did a lot of work as special effects artists before and after. They're credited for puppets and effects in films like Critters, Ernest Scared Stupid, and Team America World Police. They also specialize a lot in stop-motion, animatronics, and clay modeling, with work featured in Pee-wee's Big Adventure and several claymation segments in The Simpsons. Not a bad resume. Originally, the planned title was just going to be Killer Klowns, but the Kyotos changed it so that audience wouldn't just assume it was a slasher movie. The most expensive prop in the movie, ironically, was the popcorn gun. It cost $7,000 and took 6 weeks to build. Now, this was filmed in 1988, so I did some calculating on this. After inflation, today that would have cost $15,000. And I think in the commentary, the Kyoto said it only fired one time, which thankfully they were shooting, so they got it on film, but then it never worked again. There was also a sequence where the clowns created a balloon dog to track down some kids in the woods, but the balloon kept popping because there were pine needles all over the ground, so they had to coat it in latex. Now the ending, originally 3 of the heroes died in the film's climax, but test audiences wanted a more upbeat ending. This always makes me kind of chuckle because I remember the Kyotos in the film's commentary laughing about this, and they actually tried to argue, and they said, but we wanted a more realistic film. A film about clowns from outer space coming to Earth and cocooning people, sucking their blood out through a silly straw. So, okay, let's talk for just a second about why I regret this movie. It's amazing you married me after this.
It was like really late one night, and I mean, I, of course, have a thing about clowns. It's getting better, I would say. To the point where they don't freak me out as much. I actually enjoy, like, seeing them on Halloween and seeing all the different makeup.
Okay.
I don't want them to come near me, but I like to look at them. So we actually bought a clown costume to make a dummy out of to put in our yard, but that's another story for another episode. But I just thought it was really stupid, and I hated it that the heroes died.
But they didn't. They all lived.
Well, but a lot of people died.
A lot of people did.
Maybe I'm confusing it with the Blob, but a lot of people died, and
a lot of nameless people, or as Star Trek refers to them, red shirts. There were none of the main. The only main character who died was the really nasty cop.
Oh, I've only seen it one time. It just was not my cup of tea. And at the time, I was very, terrified of clowns. And I'm a person that, I don't even have to watch a trailer for a movie. I can just hear about it, and I have nightmares about these things, which is why I don't watch a lot of horror movies, because I have nightmares about the things that I have seen. And like I said, even what I've seen hasn't been that scary. So, I was just not okay with killer clowns from outer space. And the theme song gets stuck in your head. It's in my head right now, and I know it's not going to go away for days.
But it's such a great theme song. The Dickies, I think, performed that. The heavy metal version of the circus theme. So, quick question, just out of curiosity. Did you consider breaking up with me after we watched this movie?
Heavily. I did reconsider ever letting him pick a movie ever again.
I don't think I've ever been allowed to since. Yeah, it's a miracle that we went to watch the Star Trek movies and the Marvel movies after this. But that's it. I think that's all I'm allowed to pick.
All right, so moving on, we're going to go to my number 3, which is another DCOM movie, and it premiered on the Disney Channel on October 9th, 1999, because every year they would do some sort of Halloween movie. This movie definitely deserves an honorable mention. It is by far the scariest DCOM movie and possibly one of the scariest Disney movies ever made.
It's quite infamous.
It has actually been taken off of the Disney Channel, and it's kind of hard to find. We found it online somewhere.
It was either YouTube or Vimeo, or it's kind of obscure.
We're able to watch it
in very poor quality.
It was very poor quality, but it still got the point across. So, this movie is Don't Look Under the Bed. The main character's name is Frances, and the story is about her and her imaginary friend. And she has grown up, and I think her brother now has an imaginary friend or something. And she actually ends up fighting the boogeyman. And towards the end of it, you find out that imaginary friends who become forgotten turn into boogeymen. So her imaginary friend shows back up, which for us Disney lovers, you will recognize Eric Ty Hodges the second, which is a major character from Even Stevens. I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was, I want to say Larry, but I think that's his name in Don't Look Under the Bed. So, yes, it's his name in Don't Look Under the Bed, but he was one of the jocks from Even Stevens. And he is an African-American actor. And an interesting story, behind-the-scenes story about it is that the Disney Channel was nervous about him kissing Frances because she was white and they were worried about an interracial kiss, and so they had to film it several different ways, but ended up putting the one in the movie that he actually liked the best and how he envisioned it. But it is a very scary movie because she actually goes into Boogieland with Larry to fight the boogeyman, and that's where you find out that he's actually becoming a boogeyman, and he has his eyes turn this very greenish color, almost like a cat.
He grows sharp teeth.
He grows sharp teeth. He has long fingernails. I think his skin turns purple.
The scariest scenes of that were not necessarily the boogeyman who was the villain. And it wasn't even Larry when he was full-on boogeyman. It was the transformation where he's still kind of normal looking. There's this one really creepy shot I found online where he's crawling across the floor, combat crawling, and he's got those messed up eyes and those nothing but sharp teeth, and it's whoa, that's pretty freaky looking.
So some more facts about it. Kenneth Johnson, a screenwriter, producer, and director, his previous work includes The Bionic Woman, The Incredible Hulk, and Alien Nation, directed the film. Most of it was shot in Utah, except for the scenes of Francis's school, which were actually and Boogeyman's World, which were shot on a custom-built stage in Salt Lake City. Actually, ironically, the Boogeyman was planned to be even scarier than what we saw on screen, but Johnson felt that it was too scary, and he said, why don't we make him more Victorian, and let's have his dialogue be more Limerick-like and make it a bit lighter. Even though they did all that, they still wound up, the Disney Channel still wound up taking it off of the air due to numerous complaints from parents, which I had always wondered because, I watched it and I got through it, but I did think it was a little bit too scary, and it never aired again. I mean, it aired a handful of times, but usually they'll do like a marathon the next year of all the Halloween movies or whatever, and it was never on again.
It's ironic that it was going to be scarier, but they pulled it back because they were worried, and then they still got in trouble. I can't help but wonder, what was the original idea of this boogeyman? Because it was already kind of freakish, I thought. I mean, I'm coming at this as like a kind of a fairly hardcore. There are much more hardcore horror fans than me. But I grew up enjoying a lot of horror movies, and when I saw it, I thought, boy, this is kind of intense. So, I mean, what was the more intense ideas that they had? So
I don't think I want to find out. If you come across it online, it's definitely worth checking out, I would say.
Oh, easily, yeah. I wish we could have seen it in a decent resolution instead of the one that we got, but I'm glad I got to see a version of it, because it's really well done, too, and I found it interesting that it was shot in Utah. Ranks up there with, like, Kentucky, where we come from. Not a lot of films shot there. Not a lot of prominent films, I should say. Probably a whole bunch of indie films that people don't know about shot all over the place. But I did a few of those. All right, next on my list, this is an iconic one. This is more than a cult classic. This didn't just define a genre. In many ways, it created one. Not to be confused with the 2004 Abomination. I have strong feelings about that film. We're talking about the real Dawn of the Dead, directed by the legendary George Romero. Okay, this movie is pretty historic because, like I said, it's more than just an iconic film. It really can be credited with creating the entire zombie genre as we know it today. There were zombie movies before this film came out, but every rule and idea that we have just about to this day about zombies came from this movie. So, incidentally, if you love the Walking Dead TV series, it literally would not exist without Romero's Dawn of the Dead. All right, this movie hit theaters in 1978, and it's sort of a soft sequel to Night of the Living Dead, which came out about 10 years before, and it shows the larger scale apocalyptic effects of the zombie plague on society. Romero got the idea for this film while visiting the Monroeville Mall in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. His friend Mark Mason, whose company managed the mall, invited him and showed him all of the building's hidden passages and rooms. And he joked that someone could actually survive in the mall if there was ever a national emergency. And thus, the seed for Dawn of the Dead was planted. Romero then traveled to Rome with Italian filmmaker Dario Argento, who's likely best known for the supernatural thriller Suspiria, where he hashed out the screenplay. I wish I could just go to Rome and write a screenplay. I just wish I could go to Rome and write a poem. I'd be thrilled to do that. Anyway, I'm getting a little off track here. They then actually shot most of the film at the Monroeville Mall. Now, this is pretty tough to do, though, because not only was the mall open at the time, but it was also the Christmas season. So, filming began when the mall closed at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. when the automated music came back on. They also famously changed the ending midway through filming. Now, originally, the film was supposed to end with a pretty grim, down ending, just like Night of the Living Dead, but Romero decided he'd rather have a happy ending. Two of the heroes, Peter and Francine, who were supposed to die pretty gruesome deaths, they escape in a helicopter just before the credits roll. This is also more than just some zombie movie. It was a form of social commentary. Romero was a very politically committed filmmaker who just happened to have a knack for monsters. Dawn of the Dead was an indictment of America's descent into consumerism. It shows hordes of zombies doing what they loved best, hanging out at the mall. Also, the heroes are forced out at the end because, after dispatching the zombies the first time around, They feel like they own the place and they refuse to share it with anybody else. So they're pretty much undermined by their own selfishness. This trend pretty much continued in all of Romero's subsequent Dead films, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead. They were all social commentary about what was going on at the time. Amanda, of course, has not watched Dawn of the Dead with me, and I'm quite sure she never will.
We tried to watch Night of the Living Dead, and I couldn't make it through, like, the first 5 minutes. I have seen Shaun of the Dead, though.
That's great.
Absolutely loved it.
What's interesting is the people behind Shaun of the Dead, when George Romero came back and did Land of the Dead, they actually got connected with one another, and they were able to be in George Romero's Land of the Dead as a pair of zombies. And the actor who played Shaun and the director of that film were the two that got to do it, and they were so excited. Like in interviews, they were like, oh, George Romero's actually going to direct us. They were so psyched. And I remember hearing one time that for a while, Romero was a really big deal out of like Pennsylvania. So whenever people from that area got to be in one of his movies as a zombie, it was considered kind of a badge of honor or just kind of a big deal. Like, I got to be a zombie in a Romero movie. They were real excited about that.
All right, so next up we're going to do my number 2, which is another DCOM movie and actually premiered the year after Don't Look Under the Bed, premiered on November 10th, 2000, and this movie is Phantom of the Megaplex, which I highly, highly suggest watching if you've never seen it, or watching it again if you have. Phantom of the Megaplex, as I'm sure you can guess by the title, is a spoof of Phantom of the Opera, though it is set in modern day times at a movie theater, not a playhouse. And basically, the gist of it is there is a group of teenagers who work there, because we know that's who works at the movie theaters. And there's this big movie coming out. I forget the name of it. But they're actually hosting the premiere in this little town at this theater. And so all of the actors, the directors, everyone involved in this is going to show up for this premiere. And throughout the week, there's been all these little things that have happened. And they find out that, like, the climax is going to happen during the premiere. And so it's about, basically, Pete Riley. He is an assistant manager, and he's basically 17 years old. He's still in high school. His mom is concerned about him working so much. And he is supposed to be taking care of his younger brother and sister because his mom is going on a date, so he gets them free passes into the movie to keep them entertained.
That's just good parenting right there.
And so, basically, the three of them figure out who the Phantom really is. And one of the best parts of this movie is sweet little old Mickey Rooney is in it. And he's known as Movie Mason. And he, in the movie, had opened up like the original town theater, which he had then sold. But he still shows up every night, every Friday night, dressed in his little suit and watches all the movies and tells all of the people, like, suggest movies. He greets everyone there. He doesn't get paid for it at this point in the movie. I'm sure he got paid to be in the movie, but
yeah.
One of my favorite parts is they go to the basement of the theater, just like how they would go to the basement of the opera house where the Phantom lived. And you see all of these original posters from all of these famous movies throughout history that Mickey Rooney had collected and kept in the basement, which I don't know if they're real or if they're replicas. It was just so cool to see because I love that. I love to see original movie posters and things like that. So if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest it.
We watched that one after we got married, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Did we find that one on YouTube as well, or was it?
I think you can. I think it's also available on Amazon.
Maybe that's where we saw it.
You can rent it or buy it. I think you can rent it for like $3 or buy it for $5.
Yeah.
So Amazon has a lot of the original DCOMs that you can just buy. Like we actually bought Xenon.
Yes, we did.
It's another great movie, but not Halloween.
True.
So
this was a fun one.
It is. It's a very fun one. Like I said, it is a spoof off of Phantom of the Opera. It's a little bit intense when they show the Phantom. It is a little scary for a Disney movie, I think.
Yeah. Not near as intense as Don't Look Under the
Right.
Bed.
But it's a little bit spooky. It's definitely on the spookier side when you see the Phantom going through, like the way that it's filmed.
What's interesting is Mickey Rooney's character, I don't know, should we go ahead and do spoilers? This is another one's like, 20 years old?
Almost, yeah. I guess we can.
I think, I'll say this, Mickey Rooney is obviously not the Phantom of the Megaplex that's going on. People wonder about him. But this is one that, to me, when I watched it, I was not able to figure out who the real Phantom was.
It is set up to make you think that it is going to be him.
He, to me, was so obviously a red herring. But what's interesting is he has characteristics very similar to the Phantom of the Opera that this is kind of spoofed on, because he had that place underneath. He was the one with the layer underneath the theater, which is what the original Phantom of the Opera did, which was just another clever way, I thought, of like, it could be him, it could be, but it was just, I don't know, maybe it's because I saw it when I was older. It was so obviously not him. But I can't take credit for not knowing who it really was. Like, I didn't know until they revealed it, and I was like, oh, didn't see that coming. So, yeah, it's a fun movie. I liked it. It was good. All right, so for my final one here, it will be the legendary Halloween. And while there is some debate over what's really the first slasher film, Halloween is definitely the one that created a lot of the rules that subsequent slasher films followed. Only the character who doesn't do drugs and doesn't have sex survives, and anyone who leaves the group to investigate anything is always a goner. Halloween was directed and scored by, once again, the legendary John Carpenter, who co-wrote the script with producer Deborah Hill, who incidentally was also his girlfriend at the time. It tells the story of a serial killer, Michael Myers, as he stalks and kills teenage babysitters on Halloween night. Now, the title originally was just going to be The Babysitter Murders. Independent film producer Irwin Yablans, hope I'm saying that right, and Syrian film producer Mustafa Akkad wanted Carpenter to direct a film for them after seeing Assault on Precinct 13 at the Milan Film Festival in the late 1970s. Specifically, they wanted a film about a psychotic killer going after babysitters. In an interview with Fangoria magazine, Yablans stated, quote, "I was thinking that would make sense in the horror genre, and what I wanted to do was make a picture that had the same impact as The Exorcist." Carpenter agreed to do the film so long as he had full creative control. He was paid $10,000, that's about $42,000 today, to write, direct, and score the movie. And while working on the script with Deborah Hill, Yablans suggested getting the movie on Halloween night and naming it after the holiday, and Carpenter agreed to this. It took somewhere between 10 days and 3 weeks to write the script, and a lot of the inspiration came from Celtic traditions about Halloween and the festival of Samhain. Now, Hill, who was also interviewed by Fangoria, she said, quote, "The idea was that you couldn't kill evil, and that was how we came up with the story. When it came to Michael Myers' backstory, Carpenter used haunted house folklore that exists in so many small American towns. He said, quote, "Most small towns have a kind of haunted house story of one kind or another. There's always a house down the lane that somebody was killed in or that somebody went crazy in." Now, his inspiration for the evil that Michael Myers embodied came from an actual experience visiting a psychiatric institution in Kentucky, where he and other psychology students visited a ward with the most serious mentally ill patients. He said one of those patients was a boy who had just a totally blank, schizophrenic stare, and that was the future Michael Myers. Obviously, Amanda has not watched this with me, and never will.
Nope.
But this is such a just fantastic movie, and it's one that if audiences today watch it, they would probably complain about all the things in it and say, that's so cliche, that's so predictable. Well, the reason for that is because so many movies that came out after this copied and aped off of Michael Myers and the Halloween series, like Friday the 13th, in so many ways copied Halloween. Now, of course, it's arguable that as the series progressed, that Halloween then started copying Friday the 13th, and that would be fair. But when it comes to the original ones, Michael Myers' Halloween, that's what really started that serial killer genre as we came to know it in the 80s. It's a great film. It's a great concept. It's very simple. It's very basic, but it just works. You know, so many times people come up with these backstories for these killers where, like, you know, they were tortured at home, they were mistreated, they had horrible home lives. But the concept of Michael Myers was that he didn't have a bad home life. In fact, it was a very normal suburban home. There's no reason for him to just snap the way he did. Out of nowhere, he just clicks and just becomes this just killing machine, basically. And I would think that as a big Snapped fan, you would have an appreciation for that.
No.
No, okay, well. Anyway, Halloween, great movie, if you're into horror, of course, and I highly recommend it.
My favorite part, though, about the film has to be where the mask came from.
That is a great backstory. They were debating whether or not to go with a clown or something. I think maybe originally it was going to be a clown mask, but somebody famously took a William Shatner mask, spray painted it white, and I think they might have like combed the hair back or something.
Yeah, they did something to the hair, maybe pulled some of it out.
Yeah, and that ended up being the Michael Myers mask. There's a great meme out there that I saw where it shows Captain Kirk on the bridge looking really smug, and the caption says, "Why no, officer, I was nowhere near Haddonfield on Halloween. Why do you ask?"
It was really funny because Matt was watching like the commentary on it one day, and my parents came over, and my dad goes, that kind of looks like William Shatner. And of course, then we had to explain the story. But
now, how did that happen? How did you end up watching the commentary on Halloween?
You were watching it here.
Okay.
One day.
So
I just watching something on it.
Okay, so I happened to be watching it when you entered the scene. Okay.
No, you turned it on. I don't remember.
There's no way that you were a part of that viewing party willingly.
Well, because I kept watching it and I was like, is there any part of the movie that isn't in this? Because I felt like I had seen every single scene from the movie. All right, guys. One more movie for you. Another, of course, DCOM, which actually, I didn't know this until just now, premiered on Halloween in the year 2000. So they had this movie and Phantom of the Megaplex. So this movie is Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire, which stars Caroline Rhea. For those of you in the Halloween world, you will recognize her as Hilda Spellman from the original 1990 Sabrina the Teenage Witch series. And I'm going to slaughter this name. Charles Shaughnessy? Maybe?
I'd help if I could. I'm not sure either.
Who is, of course, the one and only Maxwell Sheffield from The Nanny. I'm sure you can guess, but Charles plays Dimitri, the vampire.
The suave British guy played the vampire? What a shock.
Yes. This one, I'm sorry, I said it premiered on Halloween, but it actually aired on Friday the 13th.
Equally as cool.
Yes. It is just a fun movie. I almost didn't watch it because vampires are absolutely terrifying to me and have been since I saw the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi. Absolutely scarred me for life when I was little. Caroline Rhea in this movie is the complete opposite of Hilda. Like, she was kind of the fun aunt, and in this one, she's a very strict mom. And what happens is, I think the son is obsessed with Halloween and vampires and creatures, and he figures out that Dimitri's a vampire and convinces his older sister. And so they try to convince their mom, and she won't listen, so they end up, like, ruining the date. They follow them. I think he doesn't have a reflection. They actually end up sneaking into his mansion because, no vampire lives in a regular house. And they get his coffin at one point and put it out in the lake. And they're like sitting on top of it. And they're like, come get your coffin then if you're not a vampire. But vampires can't cross water. And I think that's eventually what convinces Mom that he is a real vampire. But it's a fun movie.
I have not seen this, but I want so badly to see this because
I need to let you watch it.
I want to see Mr. Sherfield as an evil vampire.
Oh yeah, he gets pretty ugly. Like,
this sounds kind of like Fright Night, where you have like this vampire moves in next door, and the kids are the only ones who know that it's really a vampire.
I mean, maybe I haven't seen Fright Night, but it's a fun one. If you're a fan of The Nanny or of Sabrina, you'll enjoy this movie.
Okay, well. I said that about wraps things up. Those are all of our honorable mentions. Any other films that we need to toss out there and make sure people know about? Other than Fright Night that we just...
Not that are Halloween related. I could do a whole segment on DCOMs, but If you guys think of a movie that we haven't mentioned, but you would like to know if we've seen it or have some honorable mentions, please message us on facebook.com/Schorr Manor.
Yes, please do. That would be great.
Let us know. We would love to hear your favorites, and we could do like a fan favorite episode too.
That would be fun. I'd be all for that. All right, well, as we wrap things up, we'll move over into our plugs. You can, of course, listen to this podcast on just about anything out there. There's iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, whatever you got, you can listen to it there. We also, of course, have our own official website this year. It is schorrmanor.blogspot.com. That's where you can also access these episodes, each and every one, including previous episodes, if you happen to not have access to iTunes, Spotify, or whatever. Please feel free to go there. Also, Amanda mentioned our social media page, facebook.com/Schorr Manor. If you like, we do have t-shirts there. If you'd like to get one and show people how spooky you are, that would be fantastic. We also have a Patreon page if you'd like to show us some love over there at patreon.com/Schorr Manor, where you can get bonus episodes, not to mention early access to episodes like this one. And of course, if you want to get in touch with me on social media, I have quite a few ways you can do that. You can reach me on Twitter at @TheMattSchorr or on Instagram at @TheSchorr. And speaking of ways to contact us, if you have any suggestions of horror movies that you like, that you think are good honorable mentions that we didn't mention, you can send me an email at mattschorr@hotmail.com. And there's also plenty of information about me on my own website at www.mattschorr.net. And finally, we have one other podcast I would like to make mention that I do every single month, all about the weird and funny experiences that journalists at small town newspapers have. It's Tales from a Small Town Journalist. So if that sounds interesting to you, please feel free to check that out. And so, as we come to a close, we'll end things the way that we always like to here at Schorr Manor, everybody. Happy haunting.